The United States and North Korea have been officially at war for over 70 years, with the Korean War frozen in an armistice since July 1953 but still technically ongoing to this day. Washington has continued to deny Pyongyang diplomatic recognition despite the country being a UN member state, and has named North Korea in multiple security reports as one of its four great power adversaries alongside China, Russia and Iran. The nature of the ongoing war between the two parties, one a Western superpower and the other a resolute, resistant state, has been covered in great detail by renowned scholar of East Asian international politics A.B. Abrams in his recent publication, Immovable Object, North Korea's 70 Years at War with American Power. Having received a copy of the manuscript, which provided comprehensive and detailed coverage of many key aspects of the conflict such as information warfare, comparisons of the two countries' defense sectors, and economic warfare among others, we sat down with A.B. Abrams to discuss some of the key defense-related themes of his publication. Military Watch magazine. Your book was highly informative on the nature of Pyongyang's ongoing conflict with Washington and more broadly with the Western world, and its coverage of aspects such as the nature of North Korea's ideology and the wars by proxy between it and the US across much of the world were quite insightful and received little coverage elsewhere. You stated in the book that the US and the West more broadly adopts arbitrary standards towards North Korea's nuclear and missile programs compared to other countries. Could you elaborate on how and why that is? A.B. Abrams. Thank you for your comments. Indeed, the dedication of a chapter to proxy warfare overseas is something to my knowledge no other book on the subject has done, and I felt it was necessary to add a very important other dimension to the overall assessment of the US-North Korean conflict. Regarding arbitrary standards, there are currently 9 countries in the world with nuclear weapons, as well as South Africa, which is thought to have formerly fielded a small arsenal but renounced it after the end of the apartheid system. If one looks at Western rhetoric and policy towards nuclear proliferation, there is a strong consistency in how countries are portrayed and dealt with based on how their nuclear arms affect Western interests. Development of nuclear weapons by the United States, Britain and France in each case was hailed in the West as a positive development which would make the world a better place by strengthening the self-proclaimed free world and supporting Western values. 3 states which developed nuclear weapons outside the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Israel, India and Pakistan, saw their nuclear programs portrayed relatively ambiguously in the West, as they neither upheld Western hegemony nor did they directly undermine it. The remaining 3 states which developed nuclear weapons, however, all had their programs portrayed as unacceptable threats to world peace because they each developed nuclear weapons primarily to place a check on Western military action and deter Western attacks. These were the Soviet Union, China and North Korea, all of which were threatened with preemptive Western attacks to destroy their nuclear programs, if not overthrow their governments entirely. North Korea's nuclear program is termed unacceptable and a threat to global peace by the West because it is aimed at limiting the Western powers' ability to shape East Asia in line with their interests using military force. That is the main difference between it and, for example, the nuclear programs of India or Pakistan, which are aimed at each other and thus do not challenge Western hegemony. We can similarly see this with Iran, which under a Western-aligned monarchy was known to be pursuing nuclear weapons and faced relatively little Western opposition in doing so. This was because its program was aimed primarily at the Soviet Union, Iraq and other Arab states. Once Iran was outside the Western sphere of influence, however, and any potential nuclear weapons it developed would be aimed at Western targets rather than at Soviet ones, its nuclear program was labeled an unacceptable threat to world peace. Thus the Western world has a tremendous double standard when it comes to nuclear proliferation and rhetoric regarding which nuclear programs are threats to peace and which are not. Those which challenge Western hegemony, threaten peace, and those which support or else do not directly challenge it are considered somewhat acceptable. In North Korea's case, Claiming its nuclear program threatens world peace more than any other nuclear program is not an argument that stands to reason. As elaborated in more detail in the book, the country's nuclear program is the most defensively oriented in the world. It is operated under a doctrine known as existential deterrence, meaning warheads can only be employed to prevent the state's destruction, and under a no first use policy, meaning it will not use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear state. Furthermore, the country's armed forces are tailored almost exclusively towards territorial defense and have few power projection assets, meaning the country has no means to benefit from using nuclear weapons offensively, as its armed forces are not able to go overseas and capture territory or overthrow foreign governments. This contrasts to the armed forces of other nuclear powers, the United States, France and Britain in particular, which are oriented primarily towards overseas offensive operations and power projection. Military Watch. Regarding North Korea's ballistic missile program, do you expect further tests over the coming year? What do you believe will be the impact on regional security? Abrams. That is an interesting question. As has most often been the case over the past 20 years, the policy decisions taken by the White House will strongly influence how North Korea conducts missile testing. As confirmed multiple times by American intelligence, North Korea already has a viable nuclear deterrent, which it demonstrated in 2017, with its HWASONG-15 missiles having the range needed to deliver miniaturized thermonuclear strikes against cities across the U.S. mainland. Unlike in 2017, when the U.S. seriously considered an attack on the country, there likely will not be an immediate military need to demonstrate this intercontinental range capability through further testing of ballistic missiles. However, in what appears to have been a preparation for a potential new round of tensions, North Korea unveiled a new intercontinental range missile on October 10, which was even larger than the HWASONG-15, the largest road-mobile ballistic missile in the world, by demonstrating that it has a new strategic missile, one which still requires testing. Pyongyang effectively signaled that it has more options to respond and raise tensions significantly, as no U.S. administration wants to be seen watching such weapons tests and not being able to decisively respond, with the U.S. already having sanctioned essentially all that can be sanctioned in North Korea, and with military options effectively off the table. The new American administration has good reason to avoid provoking Pyongyang into testing its strategic missiles. Not only do missiles serve as a deterrent against escalation, but the threat to resume testing can also be used as leverage to press for some form of sanctions relief at the United Nations. China and Russia have both been pressing for this for more than a year, and while Western unity on the issue under the Trump administration was limited, with the European powers taking a much harder line against Pyongyang than the U.S. did, a Biden administration could potentially unify the Western member states at the Security Council to oversee some form of sanctions relief in exchange for Korean concessions. These could include refraining from further intercontinental range missile testing and allowing some limited inspections of nuclear sites. Neither side is going to be making concessions for free, however, so if Washington wants to claim to have made progress in limiting the Korean deterrence program, it will likely need to give something in return. Most importantly, sanctions relief. A.B. Abrams' book Immovable Object. North Korea's 70 Years at War with American Power can be purchased from the publisher here, and is also available on Amazon. His previous book from 2019 more broadly covered trends in Western interventionism in East Asia, and was titled Power and Primacy, A History of Western Intervention in the Asia-Pacific. It can be purchased here from the publisher and is also available on Amazon. A.B. Abrams is an expert on international politics and military affairs of East Asia, and holds 2 relevant master's degrees from the University of London.